There is a question that most people never ask about Judas. It's not why did he betray Jesus? Everyone thinks they know the answer to that one. The real question is what was going on inside his head before that, in the months before, in the weeks before, in the hours before. Because when you stop to really look at what the Bible describes and at what is hidden between the lines, you don't find the story of a simple villain. You find the story of a man being destroyed from the inside out. And the worst part, a lot of what he felt many people feel today. They just don't realize it. I want to take you inside the mind of Judas Iscariot. Not the version of the villain that everyone paints. Not the guy with the evil face who appears in movies. The real version. The man who walked with Jesus for 3 years. Who saw miracles happening by his side. Who probably believed at some point that he was on the side of the man who was going to change the whole world. Because here's the thing I need you to understand before anything else. Judas didn't wake up one day being a bad person who decided to do a bad thing. Something happened to him. Something was building up inside over time. And by the moment he stepped into that room with the chief priests, he was already broken inside before any deal was even made. This video is about that process. It's about the psychological and spiritual collapse of a man whom the Bible describes in much more detail than people realize if you know where to look. Let's go back to the beginning. The first thing that needs to be said is that Judas Iscariot was no small figure within the group of the 12. Think with me for a second. Jesus chose 12 men. In a world where he could go anywhere, talk to anyone, call whoever he wanted, he looked at Judas and said, "You come with me." And not only that, John chapter 12 tells us that Judas was the treasurer of the group. It was he who took care of the money. It was he who controlled what came in and what went out. You don't give that responsibility to someone you don't trust. So Judas wasn't the weird disciple who stood in the corner looking suspicious. He was at the center of things. He had a function. He held a position of real trust within Jesus' inner circle. And this matters a lot for understanding what came later. Because when a person who has trust, who has a position, who has access, when that person starts to lose themselves, they don't get lost all at once. They lose themselves bit by bit, in layers, in a way that even they don't fully realize. Now, who was Judas before following Jesus? The name Iscariot likely comes from Ishkarioth, man of Kerioth. Kerioth was a city in Judea, which means that Judas was likely the only disciple who was not from Galilee. All the others were from there. Judas was from another region. This might seem like a small detail, but think about what that means in practice. You are in a group where everyone is from one place, and you are from another. Everyone has a similar accent, similar references, similar stories, and you don't. You are the outsider, the different one. This doesn't prove anything by itself, but it creates a context where the sense of belonging can be fragile in a way that the others don't perceive. And when belonging is fragile, the small things hurt more, the moments of exclusion weigh heavier, deceptions cut deeper. Keep that in mind because it will be important. Now imagine Judas's experience during the 3 years he walked with Jesus. He was there when Jesus healed the leper, when the paralytic picked up his mat and walked away, when 5,000 people ate from 5 loaves and 2 fish, and there were still leftovers. He was there when Lazarus, a man who had been dead for 4 days, a man who already smelled bad, walked out of that tomb. Think about what it's like to see that with your own eyes. It's not like reading about it. It's not like hearing someone tell it. You were there. You saw the people's faces. You saw the weeping. You felt the weight of that moment. And you were by the side of the man who made that happen. Now think about what the disciples believed was going to happen. They argued among themselves about who would sit at the right and left of Jesus when he took power. Matthew 20 tells this. James and John sent their own mother to ask for that place for them. The others were angry when they found out. This is not the behavior of people who are waiting for an invisible spiritual kingdom. This is the behavior of people who are waiting for a real revolution, a real king, a real throne. They expected Jesus to overthrow Rome, that Israel would be free, that the people of God would take power, and Judas expected the same thing, perhaps even more than the others. Because here is a theory that many Bible scholars explore, and I think it carries a lot of weight. There was a group called the Zealots. They were radical Jews who believed that the only way to free Israel was through force, through armed revolution, through direct struggle against Rome. Simon, one of the 12 disciples, is called Simon the Zealot in the Bible, so there was at least one follower with that mindset in the group. Some scholars believe that Judas also sympathized with this line of thinking, that he followed Jesus not just out of faith, but because he believed Jesus was the leader who was finally going to start this revolution. And if that is true, then every time Jesus spoke about forgiveness, about loving your enemies, about turning the other cheek, Judas was listening to that with growing frustration, because that wasn't what he wanted. That wasn't what he expected. He wanted to see Rome fall. not see Jesus dine with tax collectors. John chapter 6 has a moment that most people pass by too quickly. Jesus is teaching about being the bread of life, about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and people start to leave. Even more distant disciples begin to walk away, and Jesus turns to the 12 and asks, "Do you also want to leave?" Peter answers, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." And then Jesus says something that hits differently when you understand the context. He says, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil." John adds, he was speaking of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, who was going to betray him. Stop. This happens long before the betrayal, before the Last Supper, before any deal with the priests. And Jesus is saying this in front of everyone, not by name, but in a way that if you were Judas, you would know it was about you. So what does Judas do with that? The Bible doesn't say, but think about what is humanly possible here. One option, he heard it, felt exposed and got angry, a resentment that kept growing. Another option, he heard it, got scared, but convinced himself that Jesus wasn't talking about him, that it was about someone else, a denial he needed to believe in order to stay there. Any of these options is psychologically devastating to carry. And there is one more important thing in this same chapter. John tells us, in John 12:6, that Judas was stealing from the group's money. It wasn't a moment of weakness, it was a habit. The original Greek suggests a continuous practice. So while Judas walked with Jesus, preached with Jesus, healed the sick with Jesus, because the 12 had been given that power, at the same time he was diverting money for himself. That is a double life, and a double life has an enormous psychological cost. There is a constant anxiety that you carry, a voice in the back of your head that never completely stops, a guilt that you bury, but that never truly goes away. And worst of all, you are stealing from a man who you know deep down knows everything, because Jesus knew. He always knew. And that awareness, that the person you are deceiving probably knows you are deceiving them, is a type of silent torture that has no name. John chapter 12, 6 days before Passover, Jesus is in Bethany, at the house of Lazarus, the man he raised from the dead. They are dining together, and Martha is serving. Lazarus is at the table. And then Mary, Lazarus' sister, takes a jar of perfume, pure nard, genuine, very expensive. The text says it was worth 300 denarii, almost an entire year's salary for an average worker. She pours it all over Jesus' feet and wipes them with her own hair. The whole house is filled with the scent, and Judas speaks up immediately. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It sounds like a legitimate question. It sounds almost like a noble concern, but John tells us the truth behind it. He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and controlled the money and stole what was put into it. This is a detail that reveals a lot about Judas's mental state at that moment. He wasn't thinking about the poor. He was thinking about what could have been his. 300 denarii, a year's salary, slipping through his fingers, going to Jesus without him being able to touch it. And Jesus' response is direct and unfiltered. "Leave her alone. She kept this for the day of my burial. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." Another mention of death. Another reminder that the end was coming. Another moment where the kingdom Judas expected seemed further away than ever. And it was after this moment, John is very clear on this. It was after this dinner that Judas went to the chief priests and made the deal. It wasn't a coincidence. This dinner was the trigger. Something in that moment. The anger over the money. The frustration with the direction things were taking. The accumulated weight of months of disappointment. All of it exploded right there. And Judas made a choice. Matthew 26:14-16 describes the moment in a very dry and direct way. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. 30 pieces of silver. Do you know how much that was? It was the price of a slave. Exodus 21 mentions this amount as compensation for the injury of a slave. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't the kind of thing that would completely transform someone's life. So what was Judas really looking for with this? Some scholars believe the money was secondary, that what Judas wanted was to force Jesus' hand, that he thought, if I put Jesus in a position of direct confrontation with the authorities, he'll have to act. He'll have to use the power he has. The revolution will truly begin. That's one theory, and it makes psychological sense, because the alternative, that Judas betrayed the man he knew like no one else for 30 pieces of silver, seems too small. It feels like it doesn't explain 3 years of walking together. But maybe that is exactly what makes the story so heavy. Maybe Judas wasn't an evil genius with an elaborate plan. Maybe he was someone who reached a point of so much resentment, so much frustration, so much accumulated weight that he made an impulsive and massive decision without fully understanding what he was setting in motion. Because if he truly believed that Jesus was going to get out of it, that he would use the power he had to escape or to finally act, then what happened next destroyed not just his plans, it destroyed the entire structure of reality as he understood it. Now comes the night that changes everything. The upper room. Jesus and the 12 together for the last time as a complete group, and even before they begin to eat, John 13, Jesus stands up, takes off his outer clothing, takes a basin of water, and begins to wash the disciples' feet, one by one, and he gets to Judas. Think about what is happening in this moment from Judas's point of view, the man you just sold, the man whose death you just negotiated. This man is kneeling in front of you, holding your feet with his own hands, washing the dirt from the path you have traveled. What goes through your head at that moment? Guilt? Anger? That terrible feeling of wanting to undo something but being unable to? The Bible doesn't tell us what Judas felt at that moment, but it tells us what Jesus did. He washed Judas's feet. No drama, no confrontation, no punishment. He just washed them. And later, when they are at the table, Jesus says, "One of you is going to betray me." And the disciples are devastated. They start asking one by one, "Is it I, Lord?" And Judas asks as well. Matthew 26:25, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And Jesus answers, "You have said it yourself, eye to eye, direct, no more beating around the bush." And then, and this is the most impactful moment for me in the whole narrative, Jesus takes a piece of bread, dips it in the dish, and gives it to Judas. In the culture of that time, offering a piece of bread like that was a gesture of honor, of care, of affection. You did that for someone you cherished. Jesus was showing grace to Judas at that exact moment, knowing what was about to happen. And John 13:27 says, "As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him." This sentence is too heavy if you stop to think about it, because it implies that until that moment, until that very moment, there was still an opening, there was still a window, there was still the possibility for Judas to back down. But he didn't back down. He accepted the bread. He made his choice completely and definitively. And something changed. Jesus says, "What you are about to do, do quickly." The other disciples didn't understand. They thought Jesus was telling Judas to buy supplies or give money to the poor. But Judas understood, and he left. John records this with 3 simple and devastating words, "And it was night." Hours later, Jesus is in Gethsemane with Peter, James, and John, praying, under such a heavy weight that the text says his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And Judas arrives, with an armed crowd, with spears and torches, sent by the priests and the Pharisees, and the sign Judas gave to identify Jesus was a kiss. "The one I kiss is the man, arrest him." And he approaches Jesus and says, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kisses him. And Jesus responds with a single word, "Friend. Friend, why have you come? Friend. Not traitor. Not ingrate. Not you're going to regret this. Friend." That word isn't just kindness. It is a mirror. Jesus is holding up to Judas the reality of what he is destroying. "You are my friend. You know that. And look at what you are doing." And Judas had to hear that. He had to look at Jesus in that moment after the kiss and hear that word. Is there anything heavier than that? Matthew 27 tells us what happened next with Judas. Jesus was taken away. The process was set in motion. Things were happening too fast to be undone, and Judas was seized with remorse. It isn't a gentle sadness. The Greek uses a word that carries the idea of being squeezed, suffocated, crushed from the inside. He goes running back to the priests and the elders, the very people with whom he made the deal, and throws the 30 pieces of silver on the temple floor. And he says, "I have sinned. I have betrayed innocent blood." And their response is cold. What is that to us? That's your responsibility. That's your responsibility. Stop and think about what Judas is feeling in this moment. He was used, completely used. These people never cared about him. They never saw him as a person. He was a tool, and the tool was used and discarded. The money he accepted, which was never truly about the money, was lying on the temple floor without any meaning at all. And the person he handed over, the only person who ever called him friend while knowing everything, was being destroyed because of what he did. There was no way back. There was no possible fix. And Judas left that place, bought a field with that money, the potter's field, which became known as the field of blood, and took his own life. Here is something I want you to consider. Judas felt remorse. Judas confessed. Judas said out loud, "I have betrayed innocent blood." He recognized his error. He felt the weight of what he did, but he went to the priests. He didn't go to Jesus. And that is perhaps the most tragic part of the whole story. Peter also denied Jesus 3 times on the same night, with oaths and everything. The difference between Peter and Judas wasn't the mistake they made. The difference was what they did with the weight afterward. Peter wept. He was destroyed. But when Jesus rose, it was Peter who received that conversation by the seaside. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Complete restoration. Judas didn't go to Jesus with his weight. He went to the wrong people, and he heard the wrong words, and he was left alone with it. I'm not saying that Judas's end was inevitable. I'm saying there was another path that he didn't take, and that is one of the most human and most painful things in this entire story. How many people carry a weight that could be placed in the right spot and instead take it to places that only say that's your responsibility? So what do we do with all this? Judas wasn't a monster of a different species. He was a man who entered a process of slow destruction and didn't hit the brakes at any of the points where he could have. He stole a little, then a little more. He let resentment grow without dealing with it. He expected things to go one way, and when they went another, he let disappointment turn into bitterness. He made a massive decision in a moment of emotional explosion, and when he realized the scale of the mistake, he sought comfort in the wrong places. This isn't the story of a villain. It's the story of a process that starts small and ends in destruction. And the most unsettling thing is this: Judas saw everything there was to see. He was there. He walked with Jesus for 3 years. He heard every word. He saw every miracle. And yet, proximity to the truth doesn't automatically change anyone. Being near something good doesn't mean you truly absorb it. True change requires an active choice, repeated, made every time resentment appears, every time disappointment hits, every time the easy shortcut presents itself. Judas had those choices, at many moments. And the grace that Jesus showed him, washing his feet, giving him the bread, calling him friend until the very last moment, that grace was available until the end. Judas simply never went to truly seek it, and that is the part that remains. Not the evil of Judas, but the grace that he let pass by. Watch the next video.